Both movies and video games are controversial among Christians. Some condemn them as worldly or childish, and some see them as harmless but exercise caution in what they see or play. I myself am a movie fan and fit into the latter category. People who know me know I am a video game fan and a movie fan. But putting that aside, is there anything to gain from movies and video games? Yes and no. This comes down to an issue of what a franchise is pressing forward as its worldview. Let's not kid ourselves and get this out of the way. Hollywood, as with any other company, is run by fallen men, and as such would be tainted. However, there are cases where a noble message that conforms to a biblical worldview can be found. Ultimately, as Christians, we need to hold every philosophy or teaching under the scrutiny of Scripture. The Bible is to be the lens through which we see the truth and should not be viewed from a worldly perspective. Any perspective needs to be tested, holding fast to the good and discarding the evil. There are many examples I could give highlighting this issue, and I'll list them. Terminator 2 in recent years has become one of my personal favourite movies. It's a movie that explores the human condition, namely what it means to be human, and the value of human life. Is it possible to change? Granted, however, only Christ can change the hearts of men and bring about change, but nevertheless Terminator 2 has a positive message that there is some good in the world. On the other hand, I would never encourage Sarah Connor or any other woman in her position to consider going into the military. She could send John Connor into the military for training against Skynet, but biblically speaking, if she were a real person, Sarah joining the army would be out of the question. See my article on Deuteronomy 22:5 for more information. I have also commented on a contrast between a good and a bad marriage using Back to the Future Part 2. See that for an example of how marriage should be treated in the description below. Another example I could point to is the Dark Knight trilogy, a film series that explores thought-provoking themes and ideas as to what true justice is, and that everyone has something to say. However, I've pointed out in the past that vigilantism is something that a Christian should not even consider engaging in. See my article on vigilantism. The Amazing Spider-Man 2, as disliked as that movie is by comic book fans, has many interesting ideas to tackle, namely the subject of abandonment, hope, and time. Something noteworthy that does happen in the film is breaking a promise that should have been fulfilled. Peter Parker, at the end of the first Amazing Spider-Man, made a promise to Captain George Stacy, a police officer, to stay away from his daughter Gwen Stacy, for her own safety. Peter struggles in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to stay close to Gwen, while at the same time keeping away from her so that his promise to her father may be honoured, something that tears him apart, especially at the beginning of the film, and he pays the price for it when he violates the promise in the third act of the film. There is a failure from Peter to keep his word to Captain Stacy, and the sting is even worse at the end of the film. If one makes a promise, he should keep it even though it hurts. Quote, O Lord, who will sojourn in your tent? Who will dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right, and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue, and does no evil to his neighbour, nor takes up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honours those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change, who does not put his money at interest, and does not take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. Unquote. This is an instance of why one should not make a rash promise that you can't keep. Jesus teaches us to let our yes be yes and our no be no. See the following article on the subject of vows in the description below. Star Trek is also known among fans, specifically Star Trek Prime, for exploring interesting ideas and questions which are too numerous to list. Even the recent Star Trek Beyond had some themes and ideas to explore. Some of the themes that are present in Star Trek are biblically sound and some are not. If you have the time to watch an episode of Star Trek or one of the movies, judge the moral it preaches on a biblical basis and see if it is a moral that should be taken on board. And of course, if anyone's read my articles with respect to universalism, I have used Final Fantasy XIII Lightning Returns and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask as illustrations of urgency in one of my own articles on universalism. As said before, with any franchise, you do need to be careful that any fictional franchise may contain lies. In other words, there are things in it that do not hold a biblical worldview. The Kingdom Hearts franchise, in particular, is another example I could give. I like this franchise a lot, although the story, while intriguing in the direction it's going, it would take another essay to even unpack what the main villain's goal is, and how he went about it. But I digress. There is something in Kingdom Hearts which is positive, namely loyalty to friends, and of course there is no love without loyalty. Proverbs 17:17 and Proverbs 18:24. There is a contrast between those who care for others with a willingness to lay down their lives, helping even those they barely know, and those who only care about their goals and aspirations at the expense of others. Certainly a good contrast in how we should treat people and how we shouldn't. But on the other hand, the characters have a tendency to trust in their own hearts, especially if it leads them into an impetuous decision that would land them in trouble or have world-destroying consequences. Trusting in one's own heart is something that Jeremiah himself would discourage, if not condemn. Jeremiah 17:9. Basically, when it comes to your thinking, hold fast to good and avoid evil when a franchise presents a particular way of thinking to you. However, this would only be applicable in cases where the story is part and parcel of the game. I could list numerous examples more, but I think I've given enough to illustrate my point. If there is a theological point that is biblical you have found in the game or the movie in question, that can be accepted, but anything that contradicts the Bible you can safely chuck out and not absorb into your thinking. And I know some Christians will dismiss television as a brainwashing device. However, I believe you are responsible for the information that you take in. You need to go to God and ask Him to conform you more to His liking and image, and think the way He does. Get into the Scriptures lest you be tossed around by every wind and wave of doctrine, otherwise you may find yourself embracing views that a Christian should not. Can a message creep into your mind? Yes, which is why we should pray to God to expunge that point from our hearts, especially if they're movies like either Prometheus or the recent X-Men Apocalypse. I'll leave you to be the judge. If you are not interested in movies and video games, that's fine. If you are, that's fine, but remember to be discerning and judge scripturally with righteous judgment. Thanks for taking the time to watch.